I thought it was going to be the perfect Sunday. My dining room glowed with afternoon sunlight streaming through the lace curtains I'd hung 30 years ago. The smell of pot roast, the same recipe my late husband Harold had loved, filled the house with the kind of warmth that only comes from feeding people you love. For the first time in months, my son Wesley and his new wife Delilah were sitting at my table, and the house felt whole again. Wesley looked healthier than he had since losing his job at the marketing firm 6 months earlier. The stress lines around his eyes had softened, and he was actually laughing at Delilah's stories about her online boutique business. I was so relieved to see him happy again that I didn't notice the designer watch on his wrist or the expensive handbag Delilah had casually placed by her chair. As I passed him the gravy, the thick brown gravy he'd been requesting since he was 7 years old, I couldn't help but comment on the positive change I was seeing. "I'm so glad you two are doing so well, Wesley," I said, my heart full of maternal satisfaction. "I was worried sick after the layoff, but you seem to have really landed on your feet." Wesley puffed out his chest like a peacock, showing off his feathers, pulling Delilah closer with obvious pride. "We're more than on our feet, Mom," he beamed, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who thought he'd conquered the world. "We're absolutely thriving, and honestly, we have you to thank for it." I paused, the serving spoon halfway to my own plate. "Me? What did I do?" The question seemed innocent enough, a mother pleased to have somehow contributed to her child's success. That's when Wesley delivered the words that would shatter my world forever. "I gave all your money to my new wife. She's a financial genius, way better with a budget than you ever were, Mom." If you've ever felt that moment when your entire reality crumbles with a single sentence, if you've ever discovered that the people you trust most can destroy you with a smile, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now, because what happened next will show you exactly how far some people will go to justify stealing from the person who gave them everything. But to understand how my own son could speak those words so casually, you need to know how a devoted mother became the perfect victim. Wesley was only 12 when Harold died, a massive heart attack at 51 that left me a widow with a mountain of medical bills and a boy who needed his father more than ever. I remember sitting at this same kitchen table the night after the funeral, sorting through Harold's life insurance papers while Wesley slept upstairs, trying to figure out how to make $43,000 stretch until my son became a man. I took 3 jobs that first year: mornings at the diner on Elm Street, afternoons cleaning office buildings downtown, and evenings doing bookkeeping for small businesses from my kitchen table after Wesley finished his homework. My hands were permanently stained with coffee and bleach. My back ached constantly, but every dollar I earned went toward Wesley's future. His school supplies, his soccer cleats, his college fund. When Wesley graduated summa cum laude from State University with his marketing degree, I was the proudest mother in that auditorium. I'd worked 16-hour days for 6 years to pay his tuition without loans, lived on generic cereal and peanut butter sandwiches so he could eat well in the campus dining hall. The night he called to tell me about his first job offer, $45,000 at a respected firm, I cried until my eyes were swollen shut. For 15 years, Wesley was everything I'd hoped he'd become: responsible, grateful, successful. He called every Sunday, visited every holiday, and always remembered to thank me for the sacrifices I'd made. When he was promoted to senior account manager, he took me to dinner at the fanciest restaurant in town and toasted the strongest woman I know. I thought Harold would have been proud of the man our son had become. By the time I was 68, I'd managed to save nearly $200,000 through careful budgeting and smart investments. Every penny represented a sacrifice. Dinners I didn't eat out, vacations I didn't take, clothes I didn't buy. It was my security blanket, my independence, my proof that a working-class widow could still build something meaningful for her future. Wesley met Delilah at a networking event 6 months before he lost his job. She was 28 to his 35, with platinum blonde hair, perfectly applied makeup, and the kind of confidence that filled a room before she even spoke. When he brought her to Sunday dinner for the first time, she arrived carrying expensive wine and compliments about my charming vintage decor. Delilah had a way of asking questions that felt like genuine interest, but landed like gentle interrogations. "This neighborhood must have appreciated so much over the years," she'd comment while admiring my living room. "Have you ever had the house appraised recently? Or Wesley mentioned you're so smart with money, I'd love to learn about your investment strategy. I'm trying to build my own portfolio." Within 3 dates, Delilah knew more about my finances than most of my closest friends. She knew I owned my house outright, had substantial savings, and received decent Social Security benefits. She knew Wesley was my only child and heir. She knew I'd sacrificed everything for his success and would probably do it again if he needed help. Their relationship moved with the speed of someone who'd already decided on the outcome. 3 months of dating, then moving in together, then an engagement that happened so quickly, I wondered if I'd missed something important. Delilah's online boutique business seemed legitimate. She showed me her website, talked knowledgeably about inventory and shipping, even modeled some of her products during our visits. But something felt calculated about her affection. She never asked about Harold, never seemed curious about Wesley's childhood, never wanted to hear the family stories that most partners find endearing. Instead, she steered conversations toward practical matters: my retirement plans, my health insurance, my thoughts on estate planning. When I mentioned feeling overwhelmed by financial decisions, her eyes lit up with what I mistook for helpfulness. The engagement party was lavish, too lavish for a couple where one person had been unemployed for 2 months and the other ran a small online business. Designer decorations, premium catering, an open bar that must have cost thousands. When I quietly asked Wesley how they'd afforded such luxury, he brushed off my concerns with vague mentions of Delilah's business success and smart financial planning. What I didn't understand then was that Delilah hadn't fallen in love with my son. She'd fallen in love with his inheritance prospects. She'd studied our family like a predator studies prey, identifying vulnerabilities and planning her approach with the precision of a military campaign. By the time Wesley lost his job, Delilah was already 3 moves ahead, and I was about to become the perfect target for the most sophisticated financial manipulation of my life. Wesley's phone call came on a Tuesday morning in March, his voice shaking with the kind of devastation that only comes from having your entire identity ripped away without warning. "Mom, they laid me off," he said, the words barely audible through his tears. 15 years with the company, and they gave me 20 minutes to pack my desk. Budget cuts, they said, nothing personal. I'd never heard my strong, confident son sound so broken. He defined himself by his professional success, built his self-worth on climbing the corporate ladder, and suddenly, none of it mattered. For 3 days, he couldn't get out of bed. Delilah called me constantly, her voice filled with what seemed like genuine concern. "He won't eat, won't shower, won't even look at job postings. I'm really worried about his mental state." When Delilah suggested they move into my spare bedroom, just temporarily, until Wesley gets back on his feet, it seemed like the natural thing to do. They were struggling with rent, Wesley needed emotional support, and honestly, I was lonely in the big house by myself. Having family close felt like healing for all of us. What I didn't realize was that the temporary arrangement was exactly what Delilah had been planning since the day she met Wesley. She'd studied our family dynamics, identified my weaknesses, my overwhelming need to fix Wesley's problems, and my terror of him struggling like I had after Harold died. The job loss wasn't an opportunity she seized, it was the opening she'd been waiting for. Within a week of moving in, Delilah had transformed from concerned daughter-in-law to household financial manager, and I was so grateful for her help that I couldn't see the trap closing around me. The conversation happened exactly 3 weeks after they'd moved in, on a quiet Sunday evening when Wesley was upstairs having one of his dark days. Delilah found me in the kitchen, washing dishes and worrying about my son's mental state. She dried her hands carefully on my dish towel and spoke with the gentle authority of someone delivering necessary medicine. "I need to talk to you about something important," she said, her voice soft but serious. "Wesley's depression is getting worse, and I think part of it is the humiliation of having to depend on his mother financially. He feels like a failure, like he's let you down after everything you sacrificed for him." My heart broke hearing this. The idea that my help was making Wesley feel worse was unbearable. I'd spent 6 years working myself to exhaustion to give him independence, and now I was accidentally taking it away. "What can I do?" I asked, desperate to fix whatever was hurting my son. Delilah's solution was presented as psychological therapy disguised as practical help. What if you gave Wesley access to your checking account? Let him handle some of your bills, manage some of your finances. It would restore his confidence, give him purpose, and show that you trust his judgment. He needs to feel capable again. The logic seemed flawless in my emotional state. Wesley was brilliant with numbers, had managed corporate budgets worth millions, and was clearly suffering from a crisis of usefulness. Letting him handle my simple finances would cost me nothing but give him everything: purpose, dignity, and the feeling that he was contributing to the household rather than just taking from it. Delilah had already prepared the paperwork: bank forms to add Wesley as a joint account holder, investment account authorizations, even power of attorney documents just in case of emergencies. She explained each form with the patience of a teacher, emphasizing how this would help Wesley's depression while protecting my interests. I signed everything that night, motivated entirely by love and completely blind to the fact that I was handing control of my life savings to someone who'd been planning this moment since the day we met. Wesley never asked for access to my money. Delilah asked for him, then convinced me it was his idea. The changes started so subtly that I convinced myself I was imagining things. My good coffee, the French roast I'd treated myself to every morning for 20 years, was quietly replaced with store brand. "We're all trying to be more budget conscious," Delilah explained with a sympathetic smile. "Every little bit helps during this transition period." My weekly grocery budget, which I'd managed carefully for decades, suddenly seemed insufficient. Items I'd always bought: real butter, name-brand cereal, the expensive yogurt that helped my digestion, were deemed unnecessary luxuries that didn't fit our new financial recovery. Meanwhile, the refrigerator filled with organic produce and premium ingredients that Delilah claimed were essential for Wesley's recovery diet. By summer, Wesley and Delilah's lifestyle was improving dramatically, while mine deteriorated. Wesley wore new clothes, expensive polo shirts and designer jeans that he claimed were interview outfits. Delilah had purchased to boost his confidence. Delilah drove a nearly new Honda Civic that replaced her aging sedan, explaining it was a business necessity for her expanding boutique deliveries. When I asked to see my bank statements, Wesley became defensive in ways I'd never experienced. "Mom, you don't need to micromanage every penny. I'm handling everything responsibly just like you asked me to." But the statements that arrived in the mail showed withdrawals I didn't recognize. 500 here, 800 there, always with vague descriptions like household expenses or family maintenance. The breaking point came on a sweltering August afternoon when I tried to buy groceries with my debit card. The cashier's sympathetic expression when she told me the card was declined will haunt me forever. Standing in line behind me were neighbors who'd watched me struggle through widowhood, build a stable life, and now apparently lose control of my finances to my own family. I called Wesley from the store parking lot, my hands shaking with embarrassment and confusion. His explanation was calm, practiced, and completely infuriating. "There was a temporary hold on the account while we restructured some investments. It'll be cleared up by tomorrow. Don't worry about it, Mom. I'll bring you groceries tonight." But when Wesley arrived with groceries that evening, they were the cheapest brands available, generic everything, wilted vegetables, processed foods I wouldn't have fed to Harold's dog. Meanwhile, I could see through the kitchen window that his cart contained shopping bags from Whole Foods and the expensive wine store downtown. That night, I found a bank statement wedged behind the mail slot, one that showed my checking account balance had dropped from $18,000 to $3,000 in 6 weeks. Large withdrawals were categorized as business investments and household improvements, but I hadn't authorized any investments and couldn't see any improvements except to Wesley and Delilah's quality of life. When I confronted them the next morning, their response revealed the true nature of what was happening. Wesley accused me of not trusting his financial judgment. Delilah suggested I was having age-related confusion about money management. They tag-teamed me with explanations that made my head spin: market volatility, investment opportunities, tax advantages I wouldn't understand. But I wasn't confused, and I wasn't senile. I was being systematically robbed by the two people I'd trusted most, and they were using my love for Wesley as the weapon to keep me silent. Every time I questioned a transaction, they reminded me how my micromanaging was affecting Wesley's recovery. Every time I asked for documentation, they suggested I was undermining their efforts to rebuild our family's financial stability. By the time of that Sunday dinner in October, they'd stolen nearly $60,000 from my accounts. But I didn't know the full extent of their theft yet. I was about to discover that losing money was nothing compared to losing the son I thought I'd raised to be an honest man. The silence that followed Wesley's boastful declaration stretched like a chasm between my old life and whatever nightmare I was about to enter. I set down my fork with hands that had begun to shake, my appetite disappearing as completely as my sense of reality. "What do you mean?" I asked slowly, each word careful and precise. "You gave her all my money?" Wesley's chest puffed with the pride of someone who believed he'd made the smartest decision in the world. "Don't look at me like that, Mom. Delilah has been building an empire with her online boutique business. Your savings were just sitting there in boring old accounts, losing value to inflation. We're making it grow, really grow, with modern investment strategies you'd never understand." He gestured toward Delilah with the reverence of a disciple praising his guru. "She's doubled our initial investment in just 4 months. That Honda? Paid in cash from the profits. My new interview wardrobe? Earned through smart trading decisions. Everything we have now is because Delilah knows how to make money work harder than just letting it sit in some ancient savings account." "But Wesley," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of my heart breaking, "that wasn't your money to invest. That was my retirement fund. That was 47 years of saving every penny I could spare. That was the money your father and I planned to live on when we got old." Wesley's expression shifted to the patient condescension of an adult explaining simple concepts to a confused child. "Mom, you're 70 years old. You don't need that much money just sitting around collecting dust. Delilah and I are young, ambitious, and we know how to turn $60,000 into real wealth. When her business takes off, and it's already happening, you'll thank us for having the vision to invest in our future." $60,000. He'd said it so casually, like it was pocket change rather than the sum total of everything I'd sacrificed to build since Harold's death. The number hit me like a physical blow, because it meant they'd taken far more than the bank statements had shown. My mind raced through calculations I didn't want to make, adding up withdrawals and wondering how much of my life's work was already gone forever. Delilah reached across the table to pat my hand with the gentle authority of someone comforting a confused elderly relative. "Mrs. Patterson, I understand this is hard to hear, but you need to think about this differently. We're not strangers who stole from you. We're family. Your money is safer with me than it ever was in those old-fashioned accounts." Her smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to seem caring, confident enough to suggest competence, but with an edge that warned me not to challenge her authority. "Wesley and I are building something amazing together, and you're part of that vision. Your contribution isn't a loss. It's an investment in all our futures. You should be proud of what we're accomplishing." She pulled out her phone to show me screenshots of her boutique's supposed sales figures, numbers that meant nothing to me but were clearly meant to intimidate me into submission. "Look at this growth trajectory. We've increased monthly revenue by 300% since we started using real capital instead of just scraping by. Your money didn't just help us, it launched us into a completely different league." "Besides," Delilah continued, her voice taking on the reasonable tone of someone stating obvious facts, "you don't have anyone else to leave that money to anyway. Wesley is your only child, so really, we're just accessing his inheritance a little early to maximize its potential. It's smart family financial planning." The casual cruelty of that statement, the assumption that my money belonged to them simply because I might die someday, revealed the true nature of how they saw me. Not as Wesley's mother who deserved respect and gratitude, but as an inconvenient obstacle between them and what they considered rightfully theirs. And honestly, Delilah added with a patronizing smile that made my blood boil, you've never really understood modern finance anyway. Wesley told me how you used to keep cash in coffee cans and were afraid of using ATM machines, until he taught you. This is just the next step in your financial education, learning to trust people who actually know what they're doing with money. That's when I realized that every conversation we'd ever had, every question she'd asked about my finances, every moment of seeming interest in my life had been reconnaissance. She'd been studying me like a scientist studies a lab rat, identifying my weaknesses and planning exactly how to exploit them for maximum gain. Something inside me snapped. Not just broke, but shattered completely and reformed into something harder and more dangerous than either of them had ever imagined possible. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. You think I don't understand money? I asked, my voice rising with 47 years of suppressed fury. I understand that every dollar you stole represents an hour of my life I can never get back. I understand that while you were buying designer clothes with my retirement fund, I was eating generic cereal because my own debit card wouldn't work. I looked directly at Wesley, this stranger wearing my son's face, and delivered the words that would end our relationship forever. I worked 3 jobs for 6 years to put you through college debt-free. I lived on peanut butter sandwiches so you could eat well. I wore the same winter coat for 15 years so you could have everything you needed. And you repaid that sacrifice by stealing my security and calling it smart business. You want to talk about modern finance, Delilah? Let me educate you about some old-fashioned concepts. Theft is still theft, even when you call it investment. Fraud is still fraud, even when you target family members. And elder abuse is still a felony, even when the abuser is your own child. Wesley tried to interrupt, his voice defensive and whining, but I cut him off with the authority of someone who'd finally seen the truth clearly. You didn't invest my money, Wesley. You stole it. You didn't protect my future. You destroyed it. And you didn't help your wife build a business. You funded her lifestyle with money that belonged to someone who loved you unconditionally. Both of you need to leave my house right now, and you need to leave my life forever. Because the woman who raised you to be better than this, she died the moment you bragged about stealing from her. And the woman you're looking at now is someone you've never met before. Someone who knows exactly what you are and will never forget it. The reckoning was just beginning. Wesley and Delilah left that evening with whatever they could pack in 30 minutes, their faces shifting between shock, anger, and desperate attempts at manipulation. Mom, you're making a huge mistake, Wesley kept repeating as he threw clothes into garbage bags. When you calm down, you'll realize we were trying to help you. But I was already changing the locks in my mind, already planning the phone calls that would begin my fight for justice. The house felt hollow after they left. Not empty, but gutted, like a building after a fire where the structure remains but everything meaningful has been destroyed. I sat at my kitchen table until 3 a.m, staring at the bank statements I'd finally demanded to see, doing math that made my stomach churn. $60,000 was just what Wesley had admitted to. The real number was closer to $85,000. Tuesday morning, I called Beatrice Morrison, my closest friend since Harold's funeral 12 years ago. Beatrice had watched me rebuild my life from widow to independent woman, had celebrated every milestone and worried through every struggle. If anyone would understand the magnitude of what Wesley and Delilah had done, it would be her. They did what? Beatrice's voice carried the outrage of someone who'd spent 68 years watching people underestimate elderly women. Honey, that's not family financial planning. That's criminal theft. And if you think I'm going to let those 2 parasites destroy everything you've worked for without a fight, you don't know me as well as I thought you did. Within 2 hours, Beatrice was sitting in my living room with a yellow legal pad, a thermos of coffee, and the phone number for Robert Fletcher, the attorney who'd handled her own legal battles with a dishonest contractor 3 years earlier. Robert Fletcher arrived at my house that Thursday afternoon like a detective preparing to solve a murder. Tall, Gray-hailed and carrying a briefcase that suggested he'd handled cases far more complex than mine, he spread documents across my dining room table with the methodical precision of someone building an airtight case. "What we're looking at here is textbook elder financial abuse," he explained, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years practicing family law. "The systematic isolation of financial control, the exploitation of emotional dependency, the gradual theft disguised as family assistance, it follows a pattern I've seen dozens of times but rarely executed this sophisticatedly." Robert's investigation revealed crimes I hadn't even discovered yet. Delilah's about-tique business was a facade, a website selling cheap jewelry marked up 300%, with total legitimate sales of less than $4,000 over 8 months. The investment profits Wesley had bragged about were simply my own money being moved between different accounts to create the illusion of growth. But the worst discovery was the credit cards. Using my social security number and their access to my financial information, Wesley and Delilah had opened 3 credit accounts in my name, running up nearly $22,000 in debt for purchases I'd never made: electronics, vacation bookings, even a down payment on a car lease that was currently sitting in Delilah's name. "This isn't just theft," Robert explained, his voice growing harder with each document he reviewed. "This is identity theft, credit fraud, and elder abuse. In Illinois, financial exploitation of someone over 60 carries penalties of up to 7 years in prison and mandatory restitution of 3 times the stolen amount." Robert outlined our options with military precision. Civil recovery through lawsuit would take years and offer no guarantee of collecting damages from people who'd already spent most of the stolen money. Criminal prosecution would be faster, more definitive, and would create permanent consequences that might prevent them from victimizing someone else's elderly parent. "But before we involve prosecutors," Robert suggested, "let's give them one opportunity to make this right voluntarily. Sometimes the threat of criminal charges motivates remarkably swift cooperation, especially when the defendants have been stupid enough to document their crimes through electronic banking." He drafted a letter that read like a legal death sentence, a detailed accounting of every crime they'd committed, every law they'd broken, and every piece of evidence that would convict them in court. They had 72 hours to respond with a plan for full restitution, or Robert would file criminal complaints that would make their theft a matter of public record and permanent legal consequence. Wesley and Delilah were about to discover that stealing from the wrong elderly woman could destroy their futures as completely as they'd tried to destroy mine. They came to my house on Saturday morning, looking like defendants arriving for sentencing, Wesley pale and shaking, Delilah's usual confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. Robert had insisted on meeting at my dining room table, the same place where Wesley had bragged about his brilliant financial strategy just 2 weeks earlier. Robert spread the evidence across the table like a prosecutor presenting a murder weapon. Bank statements, credit reports, screenshots of their social media posts showing expensive purchases made with my stolen money, even receipts from luxury restaurants they'd visited while I was eating canned soup because my own debit card wouldn't work. "Let's start with the easy numbers," Robert announced, his voice carrying the authority of absolute legal power. $87,000 stolen from Mrs. Patterson's savings and checking accounts, $22,000 in fraudulent credit card debt opened in her name, approximately $15,000 in investment account withdrawals used for personal expenses rather than legitimate investment activities. But Robert wasn't finished. He produced copies of their electronic communications, text messages between Wesley and Delilah planning their next withdrawals, emails to friends bragging about their improved lifestyle, even social media posts showing them at expensive restaurants and vacation destinations funded entirely with my money. Delilah tried one final performance, tears streaming down her face as she claimed they'd only been trying to help, that the investments were real, that they'd planned to pay everything back with interest. "Mrs. Patterson, you have to believe me. We never meant for this to hurt you. We love you like family." Robert's response was surgical in its precision. "Mrs. Sterling, Love doesn't steal someone's retirement fund. Family doesn't commit identity theft. And if you're genuinely remorseful, you'll agree to our terms for avoiding criminal prosecution. Full restitution of $124,000, payment of all legal fees, and a legally binding agreement prohibiting any future contact with Mrs. Patterson. Wesley tried to negotiate, claiming they didn't have access to that much money, but Robert had done his homework. Delilah's parents' house had equity, Wesley still had his $401k from his previous job, and both of them had assets that could be liquidated to fund their restitution. They could choose voluntary bankruptcy to pay their victim, or involuntary imprisonment for refusing to cooperate. They signed the agreement in 47 minutes, their signatures shaky but legally binding. Justice had arrived with compound interest. The locksmith arrived on Monday morning, a cheerful man named Pete who installed deadbolts that required keys I would never give to anyone again. As I tested each new lock, feeling the solid click of tumblers that only I controlled, I realized I was doing more than securing my house. I was rebuilding the boundaries that Wesley and Delilah had systematically destroyed over 8 months of manipulation. Robert handled the financial restoration with military efficiency. Within 6 weeks, $112,000 had been transferred back into accounts that only I could access. Wesley liquidated his entire retirement fund. 28 years of contributions gone to pay for 8 months of theft. Delilah's parents were forced to take a second mortgage on their home to cover their daughter's crimes. A conversation, I'm sure, involved some uncomfortable family discussions about the young woman they'd raised. My new financial advisor, Eleanor Walsh, was a 62-year-old woman who specialized in protecting elderly clients from exactly the kind of exploitation I'd survived. The money is just numbers on paper, she explained during our first meeting. But your independence, your ability to make your own choices, that's priceless. And that's what we're really protecting here. Eleanor restructured my accounts with safeguards that would make future theft nearly impossible. Multiple verification requirements for large withdrawals, automatic alerts for unusual activity, and legal documents that prevented anyone from gaining financial access without court intervention. My money was finally as secure as it should have been all along. The $12,000 I never recovered, money that had already been spent on vacations and luxury items that couldn't be returned, became my tuition for the most expensive education of my life. I learned that love without boundaries is dangerous, that family relationships don't exempt people from basic honesty, and that my desire to help my son had made me vulnerable to people who saw kindness as weakness. But I also discovered financial independence I'd never experienced before. With my savings restored and protected, with income that belonged only to me, and with legal safeguards preventing future exploitation, I had security that was actually secure. For the first time since Harold's death, I could make financial decisions based on what I wanted rather than what someone else claimed I needed. The hardest part wasn't losing the money. It was grieving the son I thought I'd raised. Wesley, the boy who'd thanked me for every sacrifice, who'd called every Sunday, who'd toasted me as the strongest woman he knew, had never actually existed. That person was a performance, maintained only as long as it served his purposes. Beatrice helped me join the Riverside Community Center's weekly support group for seniors dealing with family estrangement. Sitting in a circle with 11 other women and 3 men who'd been betrayed by their own children, I learned that my story wasn't unique, it was epidemic. Adult children who viewed their elderly parents as ATM machines rather than people deserving respect. Through the support group, I met Helen Kovac, a 76-year-old former teacher whose daughter had stolen her pension fund to start a failed restaurant. Helen had rebuilt her social life through volunteer work at the Literacy Center, where she taught reading to immigrant families learning English. You can't control what your children become, Helen told me, but you can control what you become in spite of them. I started volunteering at the Senior Legal Clinic, helping other elderly people recognize the warning signs of financial abuse before it was too late. My story became a teaching tool, a cautionary tale that helped other parents set boundaries with adult children who had expensive problems and convenient solutions. The anger took months to fade, replaced gradually by something closer to pity. Wesley and Delilah had destroyed their own futures for temporary gains, trading long-term family relationships for short-term financial improvements. They'd gained money they eventually had to return, but lost access to someone who would have helped them legitimately if they'd ever asked honestly. In trying to steal my independence, they'd actually given me a stronger version of it. I'd learned to advocate for myself, to demand respect rather than simply hope for it, and to value my own judgment over other people's manipulation. The woman who'd signed away financial control out of misplaced maternal love had been replaced by someone who understood that real love requires honesty, not exploitation. My house felt different now. Not empty, but peaceful. The silence wasn't loneliness. It was freedom from people who'd viewed my kindness as opportunity and my love as weakness. I'd traded the illusion of family harmony for the reality of personal security, and it was the best exchange I'd ever made. I'm sitting at my kitchen table as I tell you this story, drinking real French roast coffee from my favorite mug, small luxuries I can afford again because my money belongs to me. Through the window, I can see the garden I've been renovating, flowers I planted because I wanted them, not because someone else decided they fit the budget. Wesley calls every few months from whatever state he's living in now. Their marriage didn't survive the financial pressure of paying restitution, and apparently Delilah's business empire collapsed when it lost access to my funding. I don't answer those calls. The machine can take his messages and I can delete them without listening. That Sunday dinner confession didn't break me. It freed me. It freed me from the exhausting work of pretending that theft was love, that manipulation was help, that my financial security mattered less than my son's immediate desires. The woman who was shocked by Wesley's boastful announcement died that night. The woman who survived her is stronger, wiser, and absolutely determined never to be anyone's victim again. Some lessons cost everything you thought you had to give them, but the education is worth the price. 3 years later, I still think about that moment when Wesley casually announced he'd given my life savings to his wife like it was the most natural thing in the world. The sheer audacity of it still takes my breath away. But what amazes me more is how common this story actually is. Since I started volunteering at the senior legal clinic, I've met dozens of parents who've lived through variations of this same nightmare. I'm curious about your experiences with family members who've crossed financial boundaries. Have you ever had an adult child who asked to help with your finances during a difficult time? Maybe someone who convinced you to add their name to accounts just for emergencies, or who borrowed money they never intended to repay? Share your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences help other people recognize the warning signs before it's too late. And if you're currently dealing with something similar, if someone in your family is making financial decisions without your full consent, if your living situation has gotten worse while theirs has improved, if you're being made to feel guilty for questioning where your own money is going, please know that you have options. There are attorneys who specialize in elder financial abuse, support groups for people in exactly your situation, and legal protections that can help you reclaim control. If Wesley and Delilah's comeuppance was as satisfying to you as it was to me, if you believe that people who steal from their elderly parents deserve exactly the consequences they get, then subscribe to this channel right now. I have 73 years of stories about people who thought my age made me an easy target, and every single one of them learned that underestimating an elderly woman can be a life-changing mistake. Trust me, the dinner table confession that nearly destroyed my retirement isn't the only time someone has tried to manipulate me out of my money and independence. Some of my other encounters with financial predators ended even more dramatically than a simple restitution agreement. Until next time, remember this: your money is your independence, and your independence is your power. Never let anyone convince you that giving up control is the same thing as receiving help. The people who love you will respect your boundaries. The people who don't respect your boundaries don't deserve your love.